I'm going to ask you a question that has been debated and overanalyzed for the past 10,000 years. And I'd like you to come up with an answer in just 5 seconds. What is the single greatest threat facing humanity? You may have considered climate change or deforestation, perhaps overpopulation, lack of awareness, or even the insatiable greed that makes our species unique. I believe that the greatest threat is something much simpler, yet is what renders all of these other threats so lethal. Ecophobia. I had it and you have it. In fact, everyone in this very room has been touched by it. Some may refer to it as apathy, others procrastination or even frustration. But ecophobia is the crushing sense of powerlessness to prevent environmental catastrophe. We're on the brink of climate collapse and entering the sixth mass extinction, where we, the perpetrators, will be the architects of our own demise. We couldn't imagine a more disastrous outcome, yet we sit here doing close to nothing. And our lack of response to the problem has become more threatening than the problem itself. So what is the root of this ecophobia? 6 years ago, I declared myself an environmentalist, but my relationship with nature started much earlier, as a curious little girl living in Australia's tropical North Queensland. I shared my home with some of the deadliest animals on the planet, a truly wide array of wildlife. There was a day when under every pillow on the couch we found a baby python curled up and sleeping peacefully. And my sister would sneak snakes into my bed, which I would wake up to find coiled around my wrist or hanging from the ceiling. Giant tree frogs would bark loudly from the toilet bowl as hairy bird-eating spiders ambled across the floor. These memories could have easily turned me off nature, but they had the opposite effect. Seeing the integral role these creatures played within our environment taught me to love the wild and the wonderful. But I was soon confronted with the disturbing reality that not everyone felt so connected to the planet. Indeed, many of the world's richest and most influential organizations made their money raping our fragile ecosystems and slaughtering the voiceless. My sister put me onto a documentary called The Cove, which exposed the mass extermination of dolphins that occurs in Japan every year. Beyond feeling total disbelief and despair, I was consumed with an overwhelming rage at the injustice of it all. And to this day, those bloody images and haunting screams haven't left me. But it was this compelling piece of journalism that demonstrated to me, A, the power of effective communication, and B, that there were people out there overcoming their ecophobia, people out there doing everything in their power to end the bloodbath. I wanted to be one of those people. I wanted to channel my frustration into making a difference. But where to start? I desperately wanted to fight on the front lines of a green revolution, but I couldn't do so with my army of one. And before I could get others on board, I needed to overcome my own sense of ecophobia. So I made it my mission to understand the psychological hurdles that were preventing us from change. And after a lot of late nights and much research, I identified the 3 major causes of ecophobia. Cause number 1, unable to compute. Who here procrastinates? Watches Netflix instead of writing that 1,000-word essay? Unfortunately, we all do. It's a fact of life. But it becomes a pretty dangerous fact when we procrastinate on an issue like climate change. We're more afraid of losing things in the short term than we are in the long, even if the latter's impacts are far, far worse. And for us, out of sight means out of mind, so we push the issues beyond our field of vision. We humans are wired to respond to sudden, intimate attacks. When a tiger leaps at us from the bush, we are wired for fight or flight. So an issue as large yet slow-moving as climate change doesn't really activate our defensive radars. Some psychologists use the analogy of a frog in a pot of water. When the frog jumps in, the water is cool. He swims around, having a good old time. But what the frog doesn't realize is that he's swimming above a flame. The water starts to warm and warm. Our frog doesn't realize the tipping point until it's too late, until that water is boiling. And our species is that frog in that pot of water slowly reaching boiling point. We're immersed in an environment that is changing so subtly, and for most of us so invisibly, that we're unable to actually see the change. So instead of taking aggressive, dramatic action, we're drifting off to sleep. And this makes it terribly difficult to feel motivated and change behavior accordingly. I'm living in a cushy Western bubble, and unlike those in the Solomon Islands, I'm not about to be swept away by rising sea levels or intensified weather extremes. Yet. Which takes us to ecophobia cause number 2. Optimism bias. We are optimistic creatures and like to see the world through rose-tinted glasses. I'm going to put on those glasses now and envision life in the year 2100. I see high-rise buildings, streets paved with solar panels, a flying drone on its way to deliver me vegetarian pizza. But when I take those glasses off, I see something quite different. I see skies choked with pollution, streets plagued by disease and famine, entire cities underwater. It's the difference between being ignorant and being realistic. Now, greenwashing is a term you may not have heard, but it's the new face of propaganda. Businesses promote environmentally friendly programs to deflect attention from their environmentally unfriendly or less savory activities. And this takes us to ecophobia cause number 3. Even our best efforts seem futile when undermined by greenwashing. Beyond manipulation and deception, greenwashing leaves consumers with a false sense of security. It leads us to believe that others have the answers and that we as individuals aren't up to the task. The same goes for much celebrated talk fests like the Paris climate meeting held last December. These meetings increase public awareness, but they arguably do more damage by reinforcing the idea that change is being made by politicians, who, in reality, are completely beholden to their country's economic interests. Bystanders are left with empty promises, sugar-coated in the sweet assurance that everything will be okay. Don't worry, we'll handle it. You just keep on buying your green packets of falsehood and supporting industries built on greed. We try to alleviate our environmentally associated guilt through token gestures, sharing an article online, making a monthly donation to Greenpeace, or turning off the lights when we leave a room. We think that an effort is being made, but this alone will never be enough to make a long and lasting impact. It's not difficult to understand why ecophobia is such a thorny beast. Ecophobia fractures our society because it instills a chronic state of frustration, which leads to anxiety, depression, and the nihilistic thinking we have no control over our lives. I found myself feeling this way about 7 months ago. I was sitting on the floor of my kitchen in the south of France, head between my hands, trying to overcome one of the greatest hurdles I had ever faced. I'd moved to a foreign country, started studying within a standardized education system, and missed my friends back in Bali so much that it hurt. My mission as an environmental activist was on hold. My feet felt stuck to the ground as if I couldn't escape the looming monster of anxiety pressing at my back. And it was hard to remain positive when trapped in this cloud, in this fog of apathy, of ecophobia. But then, like a memo from the gods, I received a message. One of my best friends told me that she and a group from Green School were headed to Paris for the 21st annual climate talks. In that moment, I knew that I had to be there. I found enough money for a train ticket, packed my bags, and headed off. Despite it being just 3 degrees when I arrived, the air was charged when reuniting with my friends and my teachers from Green School. My topsy-turvy life had glided back onto its tracks, and I was fired up by my experience at a French public school where I'd been trampled on by authority and felt that crushing sense of powerlessness. I was ready to change the world. And that drive brought me to two people who were doing exactly that. Two people who were overcoming their ecophobia. Sue Claffols and Patrick Brown are the founders of a company I've been following for some time. While speaking with them at the Sustainable Innovation Forum, they led me to realize that the information I'd been fed about greenhouse gas emissions was seriously skewed. Yes, the fossil fuel industry is destructive, but it isn't the greatest contributor to climate change. One industry is having significantly worse an impact. An industry so powerful it can even buy the silence of organizations I once trusted, like Greenpeace and Rainforest Action Network. This industry consumes an astonishing third of the planet's fresh water. This industry is responsible for over 80% of tropical deforestation, a third of all desertified land, and is the leading cause of species extinction and ocean dead zones. We're not talking factories spewing black smoke or giant metal claws tearing away a mountainside. We're talking about the four-legged animals that end up on our dinner plates. The meat industry is ravaging our planet and growing at unprecedented rates because of the emerging middle classes. Nations like China and India feel that it's their turn to luxuriate in the unsustainable practices of the West. In the past 32 years alone, the meat industry has doubled. But it's not too late. We're yet to reach absolute boiling point. Sue and Pat are the founders of Impossible Foods, the first company in the world to create a plant-based hamburger that looks, tastes, feels, and bleeds just like real beef. Their product, this meat alternative, completely does away with the meat industry and tastes just as good as the real thing without taxing the planet. And this coming September, I'll be starting my internship at Impossible Foods. Sue and Pat's vision and dedication inspired me to jump out of that alluring warm water, to become part of the solution, not the problem, as we all can. I wanted to help re-empower others so they could see the change being made when they took action. So I developed a mobile app. NOM encourages users to take one or more of the meatless challenges. It determines where they are now in terms of how much beef, pork, and chicken they eat. It then calculates how much water, land, and energy they have saved by no longer eating those meats. Not eating one beef burger is equivalent to not showering for 2 whole months. I know which I'd rather do. Eventually, the app will also calculate how much methane and carbon dioxide they've prevented from being emitted. I believe that this app has the potential to become a huge hit and encourage that shift toward us becoming more conscious consumers. Since my first interaction with Sue and Pat, I've watched my own sense of ecophobia fall away. I'm not telling you to become vegetarian overnight. I'm saying that by taking positive action, it's possible to eliminate your state of apathy, of ecophobia, and so help save our planet. The emotional antidote for ecophobia is to rediscover our ecophilia, this wonderful natural affinity we have with the environment. We have a biological tendency to bond with the soil between our toes and the trees above our heads, yet we've removed ourselves so much from the natural world and adapted so well to man's artificial one that we're unable to see our impending demise. I realize that any great thing we go out and do in the world has to be based on love, not fear. So by constantly surrounding myself with nature, I am renewing that natural affinity I have for the environment. It would be easy to resign myself to a bittersweet nostalgia at the thought of it all disappearing within my lifetime. But I won't, because I now feel that I'm doing something to help. As a result, I no longer feel weak, I no longer feel apathetic, and I'm no longer disempowered. I am stronger and more determined than ever before. I have challenged myself to combat the greatest threat. It's time you challenge yourself to do the same. Thank you.